To discuss all this further, I'm joined on SAT by France 24's International Affairs editor, Philip Turle. Philip, welcome. So let's go back a little bit. There were big hopes of a Zelensky-Putin meeting there for a while after Putin met with Trump in Alaska on August 15th, but since then there's sort of been nothing. So where are we in terms of the Ukrainian-Russian peace process?
I think there's growing skepticism amongst Western leaders, particularly here in Europe, about the eventual outcome of any discussions between Vladimir Putin on one side and Volodymyr Zelensky on the other, and even that meeting being hosted by Donald Trump. As you were saying in the introduction, there's been virtually nothing since then. Vague claims from the White House that Donald Trump is still trying hard to work towards obtaining some kind of date for a meeting. We don't know where that meeting could take place. Even Vladimir Putin said maybe in Moscow, but I think that's highly unlikely. So we don't really know what's happening, and that frustration is I think, being increased by what is happening on the ground, as we've seen in the past 24 hours, with this never-ending series of attacks by Russian forces against Ukrainian positions. Remember that Donald Trump has been quite vociferous about this in recent months, saying that it was time for Russia to stop the bloodshed, to stop people being killed, civilians and soldiers, and that was why he was trying to bring an end to the war and bring Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky to the negotiating table. Well, that appears so far to put it crudely, to have been almost practically just hot air coming out of the United States. What we are seeing is the increase in attacks on the ground. Vladimir Putin obviously still thinking that he has more to gain on the ground than coming to the negotiating table by putting himself in a much stronger position by continuing this series of attacks against Ukraine on a regular basis, so that if there are any discussions, he will be in a much better position because he will have obtained more land. And the other point is that Russia hasn't changed in its overall demand since the start of the war. That's to say, it's still asking for exactly the same thing. There's been no inflection, no play into the hands of any other demands by the United States, for example, or Europe. It wants to maintain hold of the four regions it already controls, and also of Crimea. It doesn't want Ukraine to become a member of NATO, and it's against the deployment of forces on the ground, which are spearheaded by the European Union. So all of those demands have not changed. So it's very difficult to see how this is going to move forward. And that's why these nightly attacks in Ukraine are even all the more worrying.
Now, EU foreign ministers are going to be meeting in Copenhagen, Denmark this weekend. That's following talks that were already held between the EU defense ministers. But here, too, there's the divide over what is best to do for Ukraine.
Well, there are a few issues here. The first one, you're right, there is no universal position from the European Union. The first one is over the deployment of this coalition of the willing. Britain and France have said they're going to commit troops to the ground, if peacekeeping troops, if and when there is a ceasefire signed. So we're still a long way off from that happening. But other countries like Italy and Spain, for example, say they will not be providing any on-the-ground forces. Other countries say they're not basically willing to commit. There are about 30 countries either inside or close to the EU which have said that they are willing to take part in this. It's been written off by Russia as not acceptable. There's also the subject of the assets that have been frozen, Russian assets that are frozen by the EU, 210 billion euros. Some countries saying we should use that money, send it to Ukraine. They could win the war. They could fight off the Russians. Some in the European Union, notably Hungary, for example, but also France and also Germany and Belgium have said that's not a good idea because they're using the interest rates from that money to pay for the war in Ukraine. It generates about 3 to 5 billion euros a year. And now we have this issue of sanctions. Kaja Kallas, the EU foreign policy chief, is saying that she would like to increase the number of sanctions. She's asking EU countries to think about that over the coming days. So lots of issues on the table right now.
Philip, thank you so much. That's France 24's International Affairs editor, Philip Turle. Moving